There's a company in Michigan right now building brand new motorcycles with the name Buell on the tank. But the engineer who made that name famous, Erik Buell, has no part in it. He doesn't own the company, he doesn't run it, he doesn't build the bikes, he doesn't control the word Buell anymore, the name on the tank, the name that's literally his. He set out to build America's answer to the Japanese superbike, and for about a decade, he pulled it off. So how does a man get locked out of the brand built on his own name? The short answer is that Erik traded away control of his own name for the one thing he couldn't get any other way: the money and the reach to build motorcycles at real scale. And for years, that trade worked better than anyone had a right to expect. The long answer starts on a farm in Gibsonia, Pennsylvania, just north of Pittsburgh. Nothing about his childhood screamed future motorcycle icon. He worked his way through a mechanical engineering degree at the University of Pittsburgh the hard way, turning wrenches as a motorcycle mechanic during the day and sitting through engineering lectures at night. On the weekends, he raced. A Ducati, an AMA superbike, a screaming two-stroke Yamaha in the Formula One class, basically anything with two wheels he could afford to ride, and every so often crash into a hay bale. And in 1979, fresh out of college, he did something that made everyone around him think he'd lost his mind. He had real offers on the table. Pratt & Whitney, the jet engine people, General Motors, Black & Decker, stable careers, good money, the whole package. He turned every single one of them down to go work for Harley-Davidson, a company that at the time was circling the drain, getting flattened by Japanese imports, and only a couple of years away from its own executives buying it back out of sheer desperation. But Erik didn't want stable. He wanted to build motorcycles, and he wanted in badly enough that he basically beat his way through Harley's door to get the job. Once he was inside, he worked on an experimental Porsche-designed V4 engine program called Nova, and he sharpened up the chassis on the FXR cruiser line, the handling side of things being exactly where his brain lived. And the whole time, in the back of his head, he was chasing something Harley had absolutely no interest in building: a proper American sport bike, light, fast, and mean in the corners. Nobody in Milwaukee wanted to make that machine. So Erik decided he'd just make it himself. His first real weapon was a race bike he called the RW750, the Road Warrior. He got hold of a British Barton two-stroke racing engine, tore the thing apart, re-engineered it, and wrapped his own hand-built chassis around it. This machine hit 178 miles per hour down the banking at Talladega Superspeedway. For a motorcycle built essentially by one obsessed engineer in a small workshop, that number is flat out ridiculous. He wasn't buying performance off a shelf. He was thinking his way to it, one part at a time, and it was working. He was building genuinely competitive machines and selling them to privateer racers who wanted an edge the factory teams couldn't give them. He'd found his lane, and he was quick in it. Then the sport yanked the rug out from under him. In the spring of 1985, the AMA announced that starting the next year, Superbike would take over from Formula One as its premier class. The category the RW750 was built to dominate was being shoved aside. And just like that, before Erik could ever build a real business around the bike, the market for it dried up. All that engineering, all those machines, suddenly aimed at a class that was on its way out the door. A lot of people would have folded right there. Erik did the opposite. He looked at the wreckage of his race bike business and decided that if there was no future building bikes for the track, he'd build them for the street instead. He quit his job at Harley to bet everything on it. His first street bike was called the RR1000 Battle Twin, and it ran on a stroke of pure scavenger genius. Harley had a stash of leftover XR1000 engines lying around with nowhere to go, so Erik got hold of a batch of them, dropped them into his own frames, and started selling street-legal sport bikes with a Harley heart. He built about 50 of them before the engine supply ran dry. 50 bikes total. That was the entire company. But those 50 motorcycles carried an idea, and the idea is what actually mattered. Erik had an engineering philosophy he called the trilogy of tech, and if you ride, this is the part you're going to love. The trilogy was his mission statement. Instead of just chasing horsepower numbers like everyone else, he obsessed over three things: mass centralization, packing the weight in tight and close to the center of the bike so it changed direction like it could read your mind, low unsprung weight so the suspension could actually do its job over bumps, and frame rigidity so the whole machine felt like one solid piece underneath you. And on that early bike, he chased those ideas in ways nobody else was. He built a stiff tubular steel frame and bolted the engine in as a stressed part of the chassis, then used a clever rubber mount system so the big V-twins vibration didn't rattle your teeth loose. He tucked the shock down low and out of the way. It was raw, it was strange, and it worked. The really wild packaging tricks, the stuff Buell would become legendary for, those were still years down the road. The result was a motorcycle that didn't ride like anything else on the road. Buells were loud, twitchy, stripped down, and they cornered like they were bolted to a rail. They had that big lopey V-twin torque down low, so you weren't chasing a screaming red line the way you did on the Japanese bikes. You just rolled the throttle and went. Riders talked about them the way people talk about a car with a soul, a little rough around the edges, a little unhinged, but alive in a way the perfect stuff never quite is. People either didn't get them at all, or they fell completely head over heels in love and never rode anything else again. There was not a lot of middle ground with a Buell, and that fiercely loyal little cult following was about to catch the eye of the one company on earth that could make Erik rich, and eventually walk away owning the name on the tank. That company was his old employer, Harley-Davidson. By the early 1990s, Harley had clawed all the way back from near death and was booming again. And they noticed this scrappy guy doing wild, clever things with their engines. Harley's president at the time, Jeffrey Bluestein, wanted a kind of in-house skunk works, a place to experiment with performance ideas the main brand would never touch. Buell looked perfect for it. So in 1993, Harley made Erik an offer. They would buy 49% of his company for a $500,000 investment. To a guy who had been building motorcycles 50 at a time in a small shop, that was life-changing money, the kind of money that turns a garage dream into a real factory. But there was a catch, and it was a monster. To secure the deal, Erik had to put up his own house as collateral, his actual house, the one he lived in. If the whole thing went sideways, he didn't just lose the company, he lost the roof over his head too. His lawyer looked at that contract and basically begged him not to sign it. Years later, Cycle World reported just how blunt that warning was. The attorney called it, and I'm quoting here, indentured servitude, and told Erik he'd be putting himself in bondage if he signed. He even made Erik sign a separate letter acknowledging that the firm had most strongly advised against the whole thing. Read that back for a second. His own lawyer made him sign a document admitting he had been told in writing not to do this. Erik signed anyway. Of course he did. This was the shot he'd been chasing his entire adult life, the chance to build his motorcycles at real scale with a legendary American brand standing behind him. And this is the quiet tragedy underneath the whole story. That signature is the moment, not the bankruptcy years later, not the auctions, not the lawyers. Right here in 1993 in a lawyer's office is where control of the name Buell started quietly slipping away from the man who owned it. And for a good long while, it looked like the smartest bet he ever made. With Harley's dealer network behind him, Buell went from a workshop operation to a genuine motorcycle company overnight. The S2 Thunderbolt launched in 1994, and Erik figured he might sell somewhere around 300 of them in the first year. He sold 1,399. That is not a good year. That is a company that suddenly cannot build bikes fast enough to keep up. Harley liked what it was seeing, so it kept buying. In February 1998, it took a majority stake in Buell, and by 2003, Harley-Davidson owned the whole company. Here's the piece that comes back to haunt him. As Harley's ownership climbed, Erik's actual control over the company and over the brand carrying his own name kept shrinking. In Harley's own filings with the SEC, the Buell trademark just sits there listed as company property, in use since 1984. At the time, none of that felt like a loss. Why would it? Erik was the chief technical officer. He was still the guy. His name was on the building, on the bikes, on the podium at the racetrack. He was designing motorcycles for one of the most famous manufacturers on the planet. From the outside, and honestly from the inside too, Erik had won. He had absolutely everything, which, if you know how these stories tend to go, is right about when the ground starts to move. The 2000s were Buell's golden run. The aluminum-framed XB series showed up in 2002, and this is where Erik's ideas got gloriously strange. On these bikes, he carried the fuel inside the frame itself instead of in a tank, stashed the engine oil right inside the swing arm, and mounted one big brake rotor around the outer rim of the front wheel, a design he called the ZTL. Half of that sounds like it shouldn't work. All of it did. The Firebolt sport bike and the Lightning Street Fighter became genuine cult icons, compact machines that could embarrass bikes twice their size on a twisty back road. In 2005, he built the Ulysses, which Buell marketed as the world's first adventure sport bike, a machine that could tour all day, handle a commute, and still absolutely terrorize a canyon on the weekend. On November 17, 2006, the company rolled its 100,000th motorcycle off the line, and the sales backed it all up. Buell's global numbers climbed from around 8,000 motorcycles in 1999 to roughly 15,000 in 2008, which turned out to be the best sales year the company would ever have. For a boutique American sport bike brand going up against the entire Japanese industry, that's a serious operation, not a hobby. Then came the bike Erik had been dreaming about for decades. In 2007, the 1125R finally ditched the old air-cooled Harley engine and ran a liquid-cooled V-twin developed with the Austrian engine maker Rotax. It was fast, it was modern, and it could finally go bar to bar with the Japanese superbikes he'd been chasing since he was a broke kid at the racetrack. Then in 2009, a rider named Danny Eslick won the AMA Pro Daytona SportBike Championship on a Buell 1125R. Now, the purists will jump in here, and they've got a point. That class ran displacement equivalency rules, so Erik's big 1,125 cubic centimeter twin was racing against smaller 600 cubic centimeter four-cylinder bikes with a weight penalty bolted on to try to even it out. Fair enough. But it was still a real national title on the national stage for the American underdog brand nobody had taken seriously. And the man himself? He'd been inducted into the AMA Motorcycle Hall of Fame back in 2002. Think about that whole timeline for a second. Hall of Famer, a signature bike lineup people obsessed over, a national racing title, 100,000 plus motorcycles sold. All of it built around his own name, all of it backed by Harley-Davidson. If you froze the story right there, it's one of the great American underdog wins. Farm kid turns down the safe jobs, bets his house, and builds a real motorcycle company out of basically nothing. But we are not going to freeze it there, because in 2009, at the absolute peak of all of it, Harley-Davidson brought in a new CEO, and that man did not look at Buell and see a Hall of Famer. He looked at Buell and saw a line item. His name was Keith Wandel, and he took over as Harley's CEO in May of 2009, right in the teeth of the global financial crisis. Wandel came from outside the motorcycle world entirely, and by a lot of accounts, he never really understood what Buell even was or why it mattered to anyone. Cycle World later reported that he reportedly questioned why anyone would even want to ride a sport bike in the first place, and waved off the whole operation as, quote, Erik's racing hobby. A racing hobby. That is how the man holding the checkbook described a Hall of Fame engineer's entire life's work, and the timing gave him cover. The whole economy was on fire in 2009, Harley's own sales were sliding, and cutting a performance brand to protect the cash cow cruisers was the kind of move a spreadsheet loves. So on October 15, 2009, Harley-Davidson announced it was shutting Buell down completely to refocus on its core business. 2 weeks later, on October 30th, the very last Buell motorcycle rolled off the assembly line. Total lifetime production, 136,923 motorcycles across the company's whole run. And then it was just over. Done. A brand built over more than 2 decades, wiped off the board in a 2-week span, right as its bikes were finally winning championships. Now here's the part that really twists the knife, and it's the whole reason we're sitting here talking about this. Harley said selling Buell off as a whole, running company just wasn't practical. It had been wired so deep into Harley's own factories, suppliers, and dealer network that separating it back out would have been a nightmare. So instead of selling it, Harley chose to close it and brought in a liquidation firm run by a man named Bill Melvin to sell off the leftover assets and tooling. Hold on to that name. Melvin. He is going to matter a whole lot more in a few minutes. When the dust finally settled, Erik walked away with his tools, his knowledge, and his reputation fully intact. What he didn't walk away with was the Buell name. Harley kept the trademark locked up tight. So when Erik, being Erik, immediately started planning his comeback, he ran face first into a wall he'd helped build back in 1993. He could not call his new motorcycle company Buell. The most valuable brand name in his entire industry, the one built straight out of his own surname, now legally belonged to somebody else. So he did the only thing he could do. He named the new company Erik Buell Racing, EBR. He couldn't use Buell on its own, so he wrapped his full name around it and just kept building. And notice what that actually tells you, because it matters for the whole story. Erik never lost the right to be Erik Buell. He could stamp his own name on a building or a fuel tank all day long. What he'd lost was that one magic word standing alone: Buell, the brand, the badge, the thing a customer walks into a dealership asking for. Real quick, before we get into round 2, if you're enjoying this one, do me a favor and tap that subscribe button. I dig into a builder or a brand that got put through the ringer like this every single week, and it genuinely helps the channel more than you'd think. All right, back to Erik, because the comeback actually came out of the gate swinging. EBR started producing high-end American superbikes again. Machines like the 1190RX that could genuinely run with the best sport bikes on the market, and for a few years there it honestly looked like lightning might strike twice. The same guy, the same obsessive engineering, the same refusal to just copy what the Japanese factories were doing. By 2013, by Erik's own account, a KPMG valuation tied to a new investment put Erik Buell Racing at around $50 million. And that same year, the Indian motorcycle giant Hero MotoCorp bought a 49.2% stake in EBR for $25 million. Fresh money, a massive global partner, a growing lineup of bikes, and Erik back at the center of it, doing what he did better than almost anyone. He was climbing right back up the mountain, and he was climbing fast, maybe a little too fast. Because EBR was growing quicker than its funding could really keep up with, and the whole operation was leaning hard on that partnership to keep the lights on, which was totally fine, right up until the moment it wasn't. By 2014, the partnership had started to fray. The funding and engineering income Erik was counting on didn't keep flowing the way EBR needed. The company's rapid expansion was burning through cash, and the whole thing was suddenly running on fumes. What happened next moved fast, and it was brutal. On April 15, 2015, Erik Buell Racing went into receivership. That is not a federal bankruptcy. It is a court-supervised process where control of the company's assets gets handed to a court-appointed receiver. In plain English, a financial collapse. The company reported around $20.4 million in liabilities, and all 126 employees were sent home. Think about that for the people involved. A whole workforce of engineers and builders and line workers, folks who had left other jobs to come chase the American superbike dream with the guy whose name was on the door, out on the street in a single day. Erik's version of the comeback was over, and for the second time in 6 years, Erik stood there and watched a company with his own name on it fall apart around him. Then the assets went to auction, and this is where the story tips over from sad into almost cruel. After a couple of failed attempts to sell EBR off in one piece, the remaining assets were bought at a court-ordered auction on January 13, 2016, for about $2.05 million. The buyer was a firm called Liquid Asset Partners. Liquid Asset Partners was run by that same Bill Melvin, the exact same firm Harley had hired back in 2009 to sell off the original Buell's assets. Sit with that one for a second. The liquidator who handled the first wind down showed back up 7 years later and bought whatever was left of Erik's second company at a fire sale price. Though this time, the plan wasn't just to sell it for scraps. This time, Melvin actually wanted to build motorcycles. So at this point, Erik had lost the name once, rebuilt from scratch, and then lost the entire operation all over again. But the strangest, most bitter twist in this whole saga still hadn't happened yet, because Melvin wasn't done collecting pieces of Erik's life. Next, he went after the name itself. Then in early 2020, Melvin's operation went out and bought the actual Buell trademark, the rights to the name itself, directly from Harley-Davidson. And this was separate from the physical assets he'd picked up back in 2016. Harley had held on to that name for over a decade after the shutdown, and now, at least here in the United States, it belonged to Melvin. The price was never made public, but the effect could not have been clearer. The name Erik had put his house on the line for back in 1993 was now owned by the man who had helped liquidate his life's work. Twice. And in February 2021, Melvin relaunched it. A brand new company, Buell Motorcycle Company, building and selling motorcycles under the Buell badge again. Without Erik, no ownership for him, no management role, no engineering involvement of any kind. A company carrying his family name, run start to finish by other people. Erik, to his enormous credit, handled it with more grace than most of us ever could. He wrote to the racing publication Road Racing World to make one thing crystal clear. He had nothing to do with the revived EBR or Buell brands, and he didn't want people confusing him with a company he wasn't part of. He said he'd appreciate it if they'd stop attaching his personal name, Erik Buell, to the new company's announcements. But he wrote, what to do, and then he turned and pointed at the future, saying the future of Erik Buell is with fuel. Fuel, spelled F-U-E-L-L. It is an electric mobility company Erik co-founded back in 2019 with a French entrepreneur named François-Xavier Tourney and the motorsport engineer Frédéric Vasseur. And yeah, on paper it is just a fuel pun. But come on, you cannot look at a guy who lost control of Buell, watch him name his comeback fuel, and tell me that extra letter is a coincidence. If he could not keep the name outright, he could at least wink at it. And here is where the universe apparently decided to really test the guy. Fuel actually got electric bicycles out the door, the Fluid line, and promised a sleek electric motorcycle called the Fullo. There was real promise in it, but the Fullo kept slipping, the production dates kept sliding, and eventually the money ran out. On October 16, 2024, Fuel filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy in federal court in Wisconsin. Its assets were later auctioned off, and according to the outlet Electrek, that whole sale raised only around $170,000 against nearly $7 million the company owed. That's roughly 2 cents on the dollar. And that made three companies tied to Erik's name or his engineering, and every single one of them had either ended or slipped out of his hands, each one for completely different reasons. But the pattern is hard to miss. Now brace yourself, because here comes the contrast. This entire story has been quietly building toward. While Erik's own ventures were falling apart, the Buell brand that Melvin relaunched, the one Erik has no part in, was pulling in serious buzz. Melvin's Buell brought in the legendary custom builder Roland Sands to design a machine called the Super Cruiser and laid out a big plan for a whole new lineup. The company said it had booked more than $120 million in pre-orders in just 6 months. Now be careful with that number, because I want to be straight with you. That's a company-reported figure. It is based on small, refundable deposits multiplied out by the estimated sticker price, so it is potential order value, not cash in the bank and not bikes delivered. But even with every caveat stacked on top, the optics are rough. The brand with Erik's name on the tank is generating headlines and a reservation book north of $100 million, while Erik's own last company got liquidated for about the price of a nice condo. And in September 2025, the revived Buell built its very first production super cruiser, VWAN N0001, in Grand Rapids, Michigan. A brand new Buell, serial number 1, rolling out of a company Erik has absolutely no role in. So line the whole thing up. A company in Michigan is building shiny new Buell motorcycles, riding a wave of attention with a famous designer's name on the project. And the man whose surname is on every single one of those tanks, Erik, is 76 years old, watching from the outside as other people build motorcycles under the name he made mean something. And you know what Erik did with all of it? He picked up a guitar. In recent years, he's turned largely to music, putting out full albums, Dust Settles in 2024 and Ride Free in 2025, which, given absolutely everything this man has been through, might just be the most Erik Buell response imaginable. Because here's what gets completely lost when you only read the headline: the custom bike king who lost the rights to his own name. It's so easy to hear that and picture some helpless victim who got robbed in the dark by people in suits. That's not really what happened. Erik made a choice way back in 1993 in a lawyer's office with his house on the line and a written warning sitting right there in his hand telling him not to do it. He signed because he believed in the motorcycles more than he feared losing everything. And that belief gave the world one of the only true American sport bike brands ever built. More than 130,000 machines that rode like nothing else on the road, a Daytona title, a Hall of Fame career that nobody can ever auction off. And that's the part that really lands. The exact deal that gave Erik the money to build Buell into a real motorcycle company is the same deal that eventually put the name in somebody else's hands. He spent his whole life building the machines he'd dreamed about as a broke kid racing on the weekends, and he got to watch them win championships and fill garages all over the world. He poured everything he had into that word on the tank. He just didn't get to keep control of it, because 30 years earlier, he'd traded it away for the shot at building something real. So somewhere in Michigan, another brand new Buell is rolling off the line as we speak, serial numbers ticking up, a famous name on the tank, and this is the part the trademark never actually captured. There are two Buells now. There is Buell the brand, the badge, the paperwork, the thing you can buy and sell and stamp on a fuel tank, and then there's the other one, Erik, the guy who dreamed the whole thing up, built the motorcycles, earned the Hall of Fame ring, and put his entire life into machines that rode like nothing else on the road. One of those you can own the rights to, the other one you really can't.